Hey there. Welcome to a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about combat in the Pacific during World War II. This was a theater where dense jungles, unpredictable terrain, and razor-thin encounters defined the chaos, forcing soldiers to adapt in ways never imagined. But what if I told you that one of the most unexpected weapons, an ordinary 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, became a game-changer? Could a weapon dismissed as a hunting tool turn the tide against a formidable enemy? How did the Japanese military, with their focus on night infiltration and hand-to-hand combat, find themselves unprepared for a storm of buckshot unleashed at point-blank range? And what secrets did the Marines hold that the Japanese simply couldn't counter? The truth is, the Pacific Campaign saw the rise of a radical, overlooked force, one that shattered traditional tactics and exposed a deadly vulnerability. In this video, we'll trace how a simple shotgun, designed for hunting and home defense, became a decisive weapon in the jungles of the Pacific, revealing a forgotten chapter of warfare where ingenuity and unconventional firepower rewrote the rules. The real story begins now. Brace yourself for a journey into the hidden depths of combat innovation and strategic surprise. The Pacific theater of World War II, spanning from 1942 to 1945, was characterized by some of the most challenging and varied combat environments faced by the Allied forces. Among these were the dense, tangled jungles and undergrowth of the Pacific Islands, terrain so thick and intertwined that engagements often unfolded at extremely close quarters, sometimes within a mere 30 yards or even less. This unfamiliar and unpredictable landscape demanded tactical adaptations that could effectively address the realities of combat in such intimate confines. It was in this context that the United States Marine Corps made a strategic decision to employ a weapon that defied conventional expectations held by the Japanese military about modern warfare. A weapon that, surprisingly, was a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. Despite the limited availability of detailed documentation on its specific tactical use in combat, the presence of Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1897-1912 shotguns within Marine units throughout the Pacific Campaign highlighted a significant shift in battlefield tactics. These weapons introduced a level of close-quarters firepower that Japanese military doctrine had not anticipated or prepared for, emphasizing a style of fighting that relied heavily on rapid, powerful bursts of fire at very short ranges. These shotguns became a tactical asset for the Marines, giving them a decisive advantage during the chaos of jungle fighting, an advantage for which the Japanese military doctrine had completely neglected to provide any provisions or countermeasures. Looking back into Japan's military preparations prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, it becomes evident that the Imperial Japanese Army had invested decades into developing strategies and training protocols primarily focused on fighting Western powers. Their manuals emphasized the use of British rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and Soviet submachine guns, armaments that symbolize conventional modern weaponry. However, they regarded shotguns as mere tools suited for hunting birds or small game, not as instruments of war, and thus they were notably absent from their tactical considerations and doctrinal planning. This oversight in strategic thinking would eventually prove to be a critical vulnerability as American forces introduced approximately 25,000 Model 1897 shotguns, along with an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 Model 1912 shotguns into active service during the wartime Pacific campaigns. At the core of Japanese military philosophy in 1942 was a belief that spiritual strength, or the Kai, could transcend material disadvantage and lead to victory. This spiritual resilience was more than just propaganda. It was a calculated response to Japan's material realities, namely its limited industrial capacity. Japan, in comparison to the United States, produced far less steel in an entire year than the Americans manufactured in just a single month. Faced with such manufacturing shortages, the Imperial Army adopted a doctrine that prioritized the cultivation of individual soldiers' close combat skills, asserting that mastery in hand-to-hand fighting, backed by rigorous training and a warrior spirit, could triumph over mechanized industrial warfare. This approach was most visibly manifested in their tactical operations, which heavily emphasized night infiltration attacks, stealthy advances through enemy lines, and ferocious close quarters combat using rifles and bayonets. Japanese infantry units trained extensively in these tactics, which had proven highly effective against Chinese opponents during earlier conflicts, as well as against British forces in Malaya and American defenders in the Philippines. The standard operational sequence was quite straightforward. Advance under the cover of darkness, infiltrate the enemy's defenses with stealth, and then engage in brutal close-range combat, where the Japanese believed their superiority in hand-to-hand fighting, combined with aggressive bayonet work, would secure victory. However, this entire tactical framework was fundamentally challenged by the introduction of American shotguns, particularly the Winchester models. At extremely close ranges where Japanese doctrine predicted their dominance, the Marines equipped with Model 1897 shotguns could unleash devastating firepower in a fraction of a second. Thanks to the shotgun's slamfire capability and feature allowing continuous firing by holding down the trigger and operating the pump action, a Marine could fire 6 loads of 9.33 gauge buckshot in approximately 2 seconds. Each of these shells was packed with pellets that measured roughly 9.33 calibers in diameter, with a widespread pattern making it almost impossible to miss a target in dense jungle foliage. This firepower broke the Japanese tactical paradigm, rendering their expected dominance in close combat ineffective. The Winchester Model 1997, originally designed by the legendary firearm inventor John Browning and refined over nearly 5 decades of production, served as the primary shotgun for Marine units during the initial Pacific campaigns. Its military adaptation featured a 20-inch barrel, a perforated heat shield to protect the user's hands, and a bayonet lug compatible with the standard M1917 sword bayonet, an important consideration for close combat situations. Perhaps most critically, the Model 1897 was equipped without a trigger disconnector, a design choice that allowed the weapon to be fired in a continuous, rapid sequence by simply holding down the trigger while repeatedly pumping the action, a feature that significantly increased its destructive potential during combat. Further advancements in firearm design, such as the Model 1900. During the early years of military development, the son of Browning made significant improvements to the original design of the famed firearm. His modifications focused on incorporating an internal hammer mechanism, which played a crucial role in enhancing safety by preventing accidental discharges, a common concern with earlier models. This thoughtful innovation helped ensure that the weapon could be handled more securely, reducing mishaps during chaotic combat situations. By the year 1943, the newer Model 12 had increasingly taken precedence over the earlier Model 97 within Marine forces, reflecting a shift towards more reliable and efficient weaponry. Despite this transition, both models continued to see active service throughout the duration of World War II, demonstrating the durability and continued utility of these shotguns. Records from military procurement during this period indicate that production levels remained steady, suggesting consistent supply and demand, although specific figures regarding their deployment in combat zones have not been officially documented or detailed in available records. The role of ammunition fired from these shotguns was just as pivotal as the firearms themselves. Standard loads of .00 buckshot contain 9 small pellets, each weighing approximately 53.8 grams, or roughly 8 grains, with each pellet measuring about 8.38 millimeters in diameter. This particular load was designed to optimize the shotgun's close-quarters effectiveness, especially under the chaotic conditions of jungle warfare. At a distance of 10 yards, the shot pattern would spell out an approximate 10-inch spread, effectively covering a broad area and increasing the probability of hitting a target in dense, obstacle-laden environments. When extended to 20 yards, the spread doubled to roughly 20 inches, and at 30 yards, it expanded to about 30 inches across. Such a pattern proved especially valuable in jungle combat scenarios, where visibility was often limited to 30 yards or less. The wide dispersion of pellets compensated for the challenges of aiming precisely amidst thick vegetation, tangled undergrowth, and reduced sight lines. The Guadalcanal campaign, running from August 1942 to February 1943, marked the first significant American offensive operation in the Pacific theater, representing a crucial turning point in the conflict. During this campaign, the Marine Corps landed with a diverse array of weapons, including some shotguns. However, detailed records specifying the exact number of shotguns used or their precise deployment remain elusive in official battle reports. Such gaps in documentation make it difficult to fully quantify the shotgun's contribution during these early assaults. One notable engagement during this period was the Battle of the Tenarue River, more accurately known as the Battle at Alligator Creek, fought on August 21, 1942. During this fierce encounter, Colonel Kona Ichiki's unit, comprising approximately 917 soldiers, was virtually wiped out, with estimated enemy casualties reaching around 789 Japanese fighters killed. While this battle features prominently in recountings of the Pacific War, primary source analyses reveal that the Japanese losses were predominantly inflicted by Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns and 37mm anti-tank guns, which fired canister rounds. References to shotgun use during this engagement are minimal, with only scant mentions suggesting a limited contribution of shotguns in direct combat. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, Marines primarily utilized shotguns for perimeter defense and jungle patrols. Photographic evidence captures point men equipped with Winchester shotguns during their patrols, especially in the dense, obstacle-ridden jungle terrain, ready to respond swiftly to ambushes or sudden threats. Despite these tactical uses, after-action reports overwhelmingly emphasize the impact of machine guns, rifles, and artillery as the primary weapons influencing the outcomes of battles. The jungle environment posed unique challenges to all weapons, but shotguns faced particularly severe difficulties due to the humid and damp conditions prevalent across the Pacific Islands. One of the most persistent issues was the standard paper-hulled shotgun shells, which readily absorbed moisture from the surrounding atmosphere. This absorption caused the shells to swell, sometimes to the point of becoming unchamberable, thereby severely restricting their effectiveness in combat. This moisture-related problem persisted throughout the Pacific Campaign until the military officially adopted an improved type of ammunition. The critical change came on March 29, 1945, when the military began to exclusively utilize brass-cased shotgun shells, specifically designated as the Shell Shotgun Brass 12 Gauge, number 00 Buck M19. These all-brass shells significantly enhanced reliability by resisting moisture absorption, ensuring that shotguns could chamber and fire effectively in the humid jungle environments. This advancement was instrumental in restoring the functionality of shotguns during the final phases of the war, ultimately improving their reliability and operational readiness. For shotguns to be particularly effective, given their close-range stopping power and versatility. Despite these logical assumptions, the Japanese military's official records and operational reports reveal a conspicuous lack of emphasis or concern regarding American shotguns throughout the conflict. For much of the Second World War, American troops' shotguns remained in many ways a footnote, largely absent from the tactical conversations and documented combat encounters. This scarcity in mention stems largely from logistical challenges faced during the war, particularly in terms of ammunition supply. For the majority of the conflict, shortages and constraints meant that shotguns could not be employed extensively or effectively. As a consequence, many veterans from the Pacific Theater seldom, if ever, referenced shotguns in their personal memoirs, perhaps reflecting their infrequent use or the weapon's limited role in the overall combat strategy. The official channels of the U.S. military took steps to incorporate shotguns into formal training programs, issuing a technical manual, designated TM-9285, published on the 21st of September in the year 1942. This manual provided guidance not only on the maintenance and handling of the widely used Winchester Models 97 and 12, but also covered the Remington Model 11, Stevens Models 520 and 620, and Ithaca Model 37. The training of Marines in the use of these shotguns took place at several key locations, including Camp Pendleton in California, Camp Loon in North Carolina, and Parris Island in South Carolina. The emphasis in these training regimes was unmistakably practical. Marines learned to utilize shotguns for specific combat scenarios, such as providing point security during patrols, engaging swiftly in nighttime defenses, clearing caves and bunkers, and guarding prisoners. One particularly notable tactic taught was the Model 97's distinctive slamfire technique, an aggressive firing method where the shooter could fire multiple rounds rapidly by simply releasing the trigger and pulling it again. However, instructors cautioned Marines against overdependence on this feature, primarily because it consumed ammunition rapidly and caused barrels to heat up considerably. The official organizational structure of the Marine Corps from 1943 specified a limit, effectively a total of 306 shotguns per division, used mainly by specialized units. These included military police companies, pioneer battalions, and selected rifle squads, all tasked with distinctive duties that benefited from close-quarters firepower. From a broader perspective, shotguns in Marine divisions made up less than 2% of the total small arms available. This minimal presence underscores a key aspect of their role in the grand scheme of the war effort. While shotguns were a part of many significant campaigns, their relative scarcity and specialized deployment meant they did not embody a primary tactical tool. In stark contrast to the reactions and concerns articulated by Germany during World War I, where a formal protest was lodged in September of 1918, claiming that shotguns caused unnecessary suffering and posed a moral threat, particularly with regard to the treatment of captured soldiers, Japan's military did not register the use of American shotguns as a significant matter requiring official protest or tactical countermeasures. The Japanese diplomatic and military archives, both during and after the conflict, contain no record of formal complaints or directives aimed specifically at countering shotguns. Their training documents generally address the broader spectrum of American firepower, including machine guns, artillery, and flamethrowers, but never singled out shotguns as needing special tactical responses. The absence of official concerns suggests a tacit acknowledgement that while individual Japanese soldiers likely encountered shotguns on the battlefield, these weapons had not demonstrated enough tactical efficacy to warrant special tactical adaptations or countermeasures. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers consistently reveal a focus on American material superiority, highlighting overwhelming firepower, effective combined arms tactics, and technological advantages, rather than specific weapons like shotguns. Notably, shotguns do not appear in these assessments, a fact that further underscores their relatively minor tactical impact. This silence in official Japanese documentation offers a stark contrast to the extensive records regarding countermeasures against American flamethrowers. These incendiary weapons prompted specific tactical adaptations and defensive procedures, reflecting their significant psychological and tactical impact. Meanwhile, the widespread use of shotguns, despite their potential in close-range combat, seems to have been largely overlooked or deemed insignificant by enemy forces. During the intense campaigns in New Guinea, which stretched from 1942 through 1945, both American Army and Marine units operated within some of the most challenging and inhospitable terrain of the war. Dense jungles with visibility often reduced to mere yards created a landscape where the close-range stopping power of shotguns could, in theory, have been highly effective. The 26th and 41st Infantry Divisions, in particular, requested shotguns based on the combat experiences of their Marine counterparts at Guadalcanal. Given the thick foliage and limited sight lines characteristic of the New Guinea theater, the utility of shotguns for clearing out ambushes, bunkers, and tight jungle confines seemed obvious, and the conditions under which shotguns could be effectively deployed during combat were limited and often difficult to meet. The same ammunition-related issues that had caused significant problems for Marines during their campaign at Guadalcanal were, regrettably, even more severe in the especially challenging environment of New Guinea's highland regions. The combination of relentless rains, frequent river crossings, and extreme humidity created a hostile environment where the stability and reliability of paper-holed shells, the type of ammunition used, became almost entirely compromised. As a result, units that had initially requested to be equipped with shotguns often found it more practical to leave these weapons behind in rear areas, instead relying on more dependable firearms such as the M1 Garand rifles, Thompson's submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles. The overall experience in New Guinea demonstrated a hard truth. Weapons that perform well on paper or in controlled training conditions frequently failed to translate into reliable, effective tools of war amidst the chaos and hardship of jungle combat. While shotguns demonstrated impressive performance during training exercises and under artificially controlled environments, the brutal reality of fighting deep within dense tropical jungles revealed critical limitations that could not be easily overcome. These shortcomings would remain unresolved until the arrival of better brass ammunition in the year 1945, which promised to enhance reliability and effectiveness somewhat. As the Pacific War advanced, Marine units began developing specialized tactical doctrines tailored to optimize the use of shotguns in combat scenarios. This adaptable firearm found its most valuable roles in three specific operational niches: providing point security during patrols, defending perimeters against infiltration attempts, and guarding prisoners. In patrol operations, designated scouts often carried shotguns as part of their lead elements. These patrol leaders prepared to respond swiftly to ambushes or enemy contact with immediate devastating firepower. The wide-spreading pattern of buckshot enabled a shotgun to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously, granting the patrol a tactical advantage by allowing them to move forward while the pointman maintained fire superiority. Such tactics, however, demanded extensive training and a high level of trust among team members, as the shotgunner operated well ahead of mutual support lines, an inherently risky position requiring precision and coordination. Another specialized application for shotguns was in nighttime perimeter defense. Marines positioned these weapons at strategic infiltration points to counter enemy attempts to breach their defenses after dark. The spread pattern of buckshot was particularly advantageous in low visibility conditions, where pinpoint accuracy was impossible. The distinctive sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled served a dual purpose. It was both a warning to potential infiltrators and a psychological deterrent, instilling fear or hesitation. Nonetheless, the limited ammunition capacity of shotguns meant that once engaged, the shotgun crews needed immediate support from rifles to sustain the fight and prevent the attack from succeeding. By the October of 1944, during the campaign in the Philippines, the 6th Army requested significant quantities of shotguns specifically for urban combat scenarios in Manila. The campaign showed a different set of challenges, with Marine participation primarily confined to artillery and air support, and minimal involvement in direct ground fighting. The Army's 37th Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of the urban fighting in Manila, did employ shotguns during house-to-house combat. However, after-action reports highlighted that flamethrowers and demolition charges were ultimately the most effective tools for dismantling Japanese strongpoints. The brutal urban fighting in Manila proved both the strengths and the limitations of shotguns. In close-quarters room-clearing operations, shotguns delivered lethal firepower at very short range, making them invaluable for sudden, surprise encounters. Yet Japanese defenders quickly adapted, barricading themselves in fortified positions that prevented close approach and effectively neutralized the shotgun's advantage. As a result, shotguns proved to be most useful during quick, unexpected engagement rather than during planned, deliberate assaults. During the February 1945 invasion of Eniwetok, it was reported that 3 Marine divisions reportedly authorized the issuance of a total of 918 shotguns. However, the island's environment, marked by volcanic ash and complex tunnel systems, presented additional challenges for the effective use of these weapons. During the intense and grueling battles across the Pacific theater in World War II, the tactical landscape was often shaped by the unique environmental challenges faced by American forces. Particularly during the fighting at Iwo Jima, the nature of combat was heavily influenced by the fortified Japanese positions, extensive cave networks, and rugged terrain, which collectively dictated the tools and methods employed by U.S. Marines. In these circumstances, shotguns, though recognized for their close-quarters effectiveness, found themselves playing a surprisingly limited role, primarily because the conditions on the battlefield rendered them less effective or even redundant. The fierce fighting on Mount Suribachi, which has become emblematic of American heroism, was actually launched after the U.S. Marine units had relied heavily on specialized flamethrower teams and demolitions to clear entrenched Japanese positions. Contrary to what some might assume, the iconic image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi was not the result of shotgun assaults, but rather the outcome of methodical and relentless efforts by flamethrower crews and engineers who carefully eliminated the Japanese defenses from within their fortified strongholds. These flamethrowers, such as the notable M2-2 model, were capable of projecting a stream of burning fuel up to 40 yards into cave entrances in fortified trenches, far beyond the reach of simple shotguns. This range advantage made flamethrowers the weapon of choice for clearing complex cave systems and defensive bunkers, leaving shotguns out of the frontal assault tactics employed in those scenarios. Looking at casualty figures from the Battle of Eniwetok, or Uema, which saw approximately 26,000 American wounded and killed, available records do not indicate that any injuries or deaths resulted directly from the ineffectiveness of shotguns or failures in their tactical deployment. This suggests that shotguns, although theoretically valuable in close combat, were not a decisive factor in the casualties or in the overall outcome of those engagements. By the time modifications in ammunition, particularly the introduction of brass shells, reached the front lines, the battle had largely concluded. This late arrival, specifically the M19 brass shell, only became available to some units in late March of 1945, after the fighting at Uema had ended, meaning that during the most intense phases of that campaign, Marines were still grappling with unreliable paper shells that hampered shotgun efficacy. Later in the war, during the pivotal Battle of Okinawa in April and June of 1945, the U.S. Marines began to fully implement the lessons they had absorbed from earlier campaigns across the Pacific. This included improvements in weapons reliability and tactics. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions, for instance, were authorized to carry 612 shotguns, now equipped with dependable brass ammunition. Despite this logistical upgrade, the broad combat environment of Okinawa posed its own challenges. Much of the fighting took place across extensive open terrain against well-prepared Japanese defensive positions, which limited opportunities for shotguns to be effectively employed. The Japanese defenses on Okinawa were notably different from the earlier, more fluid battlefield tactics. The Japanese 32nd Army adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, heavily relying on fortified positions within the iconic Shuri Line, which included bunkers and extensive cave systems. This approach allowed Japanese units to fight from protected positions, engaging American forces at extended ranges, and showcasing their strategic emphasis on entrenched defenses rather than head-on assaults. Consequently, Marines primarily relied on coordinated tank infantry tactics, with flamethrower-equipped tanks offering close support, an indication that even in the final stages of island conquest, the effective use of flame and firepower overshadowed traditional infantry weapons like shotguns. However, shotguns did have their moment of use at Okinawa, most notably during the final stages of reducing Japanese positions. Marine squads tasked with clearing out the remaining pockets of resistance within captured fortifications employed shotguns in close-quarters combat. Additionally, shotguns served a role in assisting military police units, which managed the enormous civilian movement and chaos that characterized the island's aftermath. Despite their presence, these applications of shotguns constituted only a small fraction of the overall combat efforts. The weapon was not a primary tool, but rather a supplementary one in specific scenarios. In spite of the extensive documentation of battles in the Pacific, detailed reports and first-hand accounts that focus specifically on the employment of shotguns remain surprisingly scarce. Major repositories such as the Library of Congress Veterans History Project contain thousands of interviews with veterans who served in the Pacific War, yet references to shotgun use are minimal or almost non-existent. The National Museum of the Pacific War holds well over 4,000 oral histories, but mentions of shotguns in combat are hardly present. Even highly regarded personal memoirs such as Eugene Sledge's With the Old Breed, widely regarded as one of the finest narratives of Marine combat in the Pacific, make no mention of shotguns. Sledge served in a rifle company during the battles at Paliu and Okinawa, but described the direct fighting and tactics without any specific note of shotguns being employed. Similarly, throughout the period of active military engagement, experiences and official records alike suggest that shotguns occupied a relatively niche role within the broader scope of armed conflict. While some personal testimonies and anecdotal references note the utility of shotguns for specific tasks, particularly in situations demanding close-quarters security or stealth ambushes, they are seldom recognized as primary weapons during combat operations. Veterans often recalled that, in the darkness of night patrols or in dense jungle terrain, shotguns could be valuable tools for maintaining security and surprising enemies. However, they consistently emphasized that the outcomes of pivotal battles were predominantly influenced by more powerful and versatile weapons, rifles, machine guns, and artillery, such as mortars. This consensus aligns with official military records, which indicate that shotguns formed a mere fraction, less than 2%, of the total armament issued across entire divisions. During World War II, the American arms industry mobilized to produce massive quantities of firearms and artillery. Among these, military shotguns saw significant manufacturing efforts, illustrating the country's immense industrial capacity. Winchester, one of the leading firearms manufacturers, produced approximately 25,000 of its famed Model 97 shotguns and between 60 and 80,000 Model 12 shotguns, specifically under military contracts. Other renowned companies such as Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca also contributed their share to this production effort, collectively delivering several thousand additional units. This impressive scale of manufacturing demonstrated America's ability to produce significant quantities of firearm equipment rapidly. Nevertheless, the sheer volume of shotguns manufactured does not necessarily correlate with their widespread deployment in combat scenarios. In reality, many of the shotguns manufactured during this period found their way into roles disconnected from frontline fighting. Instead of being issued to frontline infantry units, a large number served in training environments, guard units, and rear area security details. Military police units, for instance, relied heavily on shotguns for managing prisoners or securing convoy routes, while naval vessels carried shotguns as part of their boarding parties for security and interdiction duties. Similarly, air bases employed shotguns as part of perimeter security measures, providing a reliable means to defend vital installations from intruders or sabotage. Roles that, though crucial, did not involve direct confrontation with enemy combatants. This widespread use of shotguns in soft or secondary roles reflects the reality that, despite the capability and production capacity to equip every Marine squad with shotguns, numerous practical limitations prevented their extensive use in combat. Factors such as ammunition availability, tactical doctrine, and strategic priorities meant that most shotguns remained in reserve or secondary functions. Moreover, their specialized utility as close-quarters weapons prevented them from becoming standard issue for frontline personnel engaged in open-field fighting, where longer-range rifles and machine guns provided the necessary firepower. To better understand the actual role and utility of shotguns in the Pacific Theater, it is instructive to compare their use with other weapons that saw widespread employment in detailed record-keeping. The M2 flamethrower, introduced in the year 1943, stands out as an example of a weapon with extensive documented combat use. Accounts clearly describe the deployment of flamethrowers in clearing caves, bunkers, and fortified positions, where flames proved decisive in neutralizing defenders. Marine units reported using in excess of 27,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel during operations at Iwo Jima, with meticulous records attesting to their tactical effectiveness. In stark contrast, similar detailed record-keeping for shotgun ammunition expenditure or specific combat employment simply does not exist. This absence of formal documentation hints that shotguns, despite their theoretical inclusion in tactical plans, were rarely employed in a manner that was systematically recorded. Other weapons, such as the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, served as the backbone of Marine Squad firepower, with extensive documentation describing their tactical deployment, ammunition consumption, and combat outcomes. By 1944, every Marine rifle squad incorporated 3-bar teams, backed by deliberate training programs and established doctrine designed around this weapon. These records provide a clear picture of the weapon's pivotal role in combat and their influence on tactical decisions. Despite their formal authorization in military doctrine, shotguns never achieved similar integration or combat documentation. Even the relatively uncommon M1918 Browning machine gun, which was a vital component of many units, generated far more combat accounts than shotguns did. Veterans recalled specific instances where the Browning machine gun was employed effectively, describing the tactical context, the amount of ammunition used, and its decisive impact on engagements. Yet similar detailed accounts for shotguns are conspicuously absent. This suggests that, despite official policies and manufacturing numbers, Actual use of shotguns in direct combat was limited. Their ideal role as close-quarters weapons did not translate into widespread or systematically recorded battle employment, contrasting sharply with the prominence of other firearms that feature prominently in operational histories. This divergence between the mythology surrounding shotguns, often romanticized or exaggerated in popular culture, and the sober realities of military record-keeping and combat experience reflects broader patterns within World War II historiography. Movies, wartime narratives, and sensational accounts, often fueled by Hollywood. The striking visual impact and the devastating close-range effectiveness of shotguns during the Pacific Theater naturally fueled the creation of numerous myths and heroic stories. Films made in the aftermath of World War II frequently depicted American Marines storming Japanese positions, wielding shotguns, portraying them as essential and iconic weapons of the Pacific conflict. These cinematic images left a lasting impression on the public consciousness, despite the fact that they were rarely supported by tangible, primary historical sources or documented military records. Over time, various forms of popular media, including video games and historical narratives tailored for entertainment or patriotic appeal, continued to cement the picture of shotguns as core elements of the Pacific War armamentarium. Consequently, shotguns became emblematic of the brutal, close-quarters combat that characterized many of those battles, even though detailed documentation reveals that their actual usage was far more limited and situational than popular depictions suggested. This process of mythologizing has effectively overshadowed the more mundane but accurate reality that shotguns played a predominantly auxiliary and specialized role within the wider scope of military tactics during the conflict. While their dramatic appearance in stories and images serves a clear narrative purpose, adding an element of intense, visceral combat and accentuating the technological contrast between American and Japanese forces, the reality was that shotguns, though present, never held the decisive tactical significance attributed to rifles, machine guns, mortars, or flamethrowers. These weapons, in contrast, played a far more central role in influencing the outcomes of engagements and shaping battlefield strategies. Accounts from veterans who carried shotguns offer valuable insights into their actual employment and effectiveness during the war. Marines who carried these weapons generally recalled them as being useful for particular applications, such as nighttime patrols or navigating through jungle pathways, yet acknowledged that in the chaos of combat, they were often burdensome and less practical than other firearms. The weight of the shotgun, the limited capacity of its magazine, and its specialized role meant that most soldiers, when faced with diverse combat situations, preferred to rely on rifles, which provided greater versatility and firepower. One Marine veteran, interviewed in 1985, recounted carrying a Model 97 shotgun during the Battle of Guadalcanal. He noted that while the shotgun was effective for night watch duties and moving along jungle trails, it was essentially useless at longer ranges. When combat intensified, the same soldier emphasized, a rifle was far more suitable for engaging enemies effectively. This practical assessment emphasizes the inherent limitations of shotguns in varied combat scenarios, underscoring that while useful in specific circumstances, they could not serve as the primary weapon system. The role of shotguns was indeed niche-specific. They excelled in close-quarters situations, but were not capable of fulfilling the broader needs of regular combat units. Another veteran from the 2nd Marine Division described how shotgun allocation was handled at the unit level. Despite organizational plans that called for each squad to be equipped with one shotgun, in reality, many remained in the company's storage and weren't issued routinely. This discrepancy highlights a common gap between formal authorization and actual battlefield implementation. Shotguns, though officially authorized and issued in some units, often proved too specialized or inconvenient for everyday combat use, leading to a preference for more flexible, higher-capacity rifles. Meanwhile, a technological improvement in the form of brass-cased M19 ammunition was introduced in March of 1945, ostensibly to resolve a persistent problem with moisture affecting shotgun shells throughout the Pacific Campaign. This development promised enhanced reliability and operational readiness, especially in the humid and rainy conditions typical of the Pacific Islands. However, the timing of this innovation meant it arrived too late to influence the outcome of most ongoing or upcoming engagements. By mid-March, the Battle of Iwo Jima was over, the island securely in American hands, and preparations for the invasion of Okinawa were already underway. Battles that would test new tactics and weaponry. The Philippines campaign had mostly concluded by this point, and further Pacific battles were to be fought primarily with well-established tactics and weapon systems that had proven effective. While the new brass ammunition did improve the reliability of shotguns in occupation duties and in logistical roles, it remained largely untested in the crucible of combat during the late stages of the war. Nonetheless, military planners preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, requested significant allocations of shotguns, especially for urban combat in Japanese cities where close quarters fighting was anticipated. This allocation underscores the strategic thinking that valued shotguns for their supposed utility in indoor and confined environments. However, with the atomic bomb's deployment and the subsequent surrender of Japan, the need for such specialized equipment in future operations vanished, leaving the potential of brass-cased shells mostly untested in combat. Post-war analyses suggested that had these cartridges been available earlier, they might have significantly enhanced the effectiveness of shotguns in combat by improving reliability and performance in the human theater. Despite this, such speculation remains hypothetical, and the actual historical record confirms that shotguns never played a central or decisive role in the strategic outcomes of the Pacific War. Throughout the duration, during the course of the Second World War, many military forces around the world faced a myriad of challenges related to their weaponry, and among these, the reliability of ammunition used with various firearms and artillery played a crucial role. For advanced weapon systems and traditional armaments alike, issues such as misfire rates, inconsistent supply, and logistical hurdles in maintaining the supply chain often hampered their effectiveness on the battlefield. In particular, the problems associated with ammunition reliability proved to be a significant obstacle, especially in situations demanding rapid and sustained fire. When ammunition failed to perform reliably, it imposed restrictions on the operational use of weapons, thereby significantly limiting their tactical value during combat engagements. One noteworthy aspect of this discussion is the apparent lack of specific Japanese defensive countermeasures designed to neutralize or mitigate the threat posed by shotguns. This oversight offers a valuable insight into the strategic and tactical mindset of the Japanese military during the conflict. While they developed and implemented detailed countermeasures against many American weapons, such as establishing overhead cover positions to reduce the effectiveness of mortar attacks, constructing spider holes to defend against armored threats, and creating reverse slope defenses to shield against naval gunfire, the absence of comparable measures against shotguns strongly suggests that these firearms did not achieve a level of impact severe enough to warrant specialized defenses. The evolution of Japanese tactical strategies throughout the Pacific War primarily focused on countering American technological and material superiority through a combination of terrain exploitation and layered defensive formations. For instance, the transition from static beach defenses to more flexible inland fortifications allowed Japanese forces to better utilize natural terrain features for protection. Additionally, extensive tunnel networks were developed to enable safe movement and logistical support, effectively complicating the attacking force's efforts to root out entrenched defenders. Over time, the Japanese military also abandoned the once prevalent tactics of large-scale banzai charges, which had relied heavily on human wave assaults, because such tactics proved vulnerable against the concentrated firepower of American forces. These tactical shifts were predominantly responses to American firepower in general, rather than specific weapons such as shotguns. The overall increase in American artillery, naval gunfire, and mechanized units necessitated adaptations that prioritized terrain and dispersed defenses over targeted countermeasures against particular small arms or shotguns. When post-war Japanese military analysis was conducted to examine the lessons learned during the conflict, the focus was largely on evaluating the effectiveness of American artillery coordination, naval support operations, and combined arms tactics with tanks and infantry. Interestingly, these studies paid scant attention to shotguns, indicating that, from their perspective, shotguns did not significantly influence their tactical approaches or decision-making processes. An additional telling aspect of the shotgun's role, or lack thereof, in the Pacific theater emerges from the absence of statistical data and detailed analyses in wartime records. World War II was characterized by an overwhelming amount of quantitative data collection, statistics on ammunition expenditure, casualty ratios, weapon effectiveness surveys, and operational reports. Despite this extensive data pool, no credible or comprehensive statistics exist that directly correlate the use of shotguns with enemy casualties, tactical successes, or failures. The operational research units tasked with evaluating weapon effectiveness focus primarily on artillery accuracy, mortar reliability, small arms performance, and vehicle mobility, producing detailed reports that measured hit probabilities, casualty rates, and ammunition efficiency. In stark contrast, there are no comparable studies for shotguns, no detailed assessments, effectiveness reports, or statistical analyses archived in military records. This lack of data strongly indicates that shotguns did not see widespread or sustained combat use sufficient to generate meaningful quantitative evaluations. Even informal estimates provided by veterans or recorded in memoirs rarely include figures pertaining to shotgun employment, such as rounds fired, targets engaged, or enemy casualties inflicted. The near-complete absence of such statistics underscores the peripheral role shotguns played within broader tactical operations, despite their presence in the gear of Marine units and the extensive training provided to their personnel. Marine training at various camps reinforced the notion that shotguns could be vital combat tools, preparing Marines with advanced techniques such as slamfire methods, drills for jungle fighting scenarios, and qualification tests involving buckshot and slug shells. These training regimes fostered the expectation that shotguns would be central to combat engagements, particularly in close quarters fighting often envisioned in jungle or bunker scenarios. However, the reality encountered during actual combat proved to be quite different from these preparatory exercises. The conditions at training facilities like Camp Pendleton, characterized by controlled environments and predictable targets, did not match the humid, jungle-dense landscapes of Guadalcanal or the ash-covered volcanic terrain of Eniwetok. In combat, engagements often involved unpredictable circumstances, longer ranges, and enemies that sometimes fought back fiercely, making the controlled, stationary targets typical of training unrealistic. Furthermore, the high-intensity close-range encounters that many training scenarios emphasized appeared less common in the broader scope of real battles. The difference between the simulated training environment and the unpredictable nature of actual combat created a disparity, highlighting how initial expectations of the shotgun's utility were not fully met in practical applications. As a result, the firearms, which had been so heavily emphasized during training during World War II, the role of shotguns in combat zones bore similarities to various other experiences faced by military forces during that tumultuous era. Despite the substantial time and effort dedicated to training soldiers in the use of bayonets, the reality was that actual bayonet combat was exceedingly rare. Many troops underwent extensive drills to perfect their bayonet techniques, but in the end, very few encountered the need to employ their blades in close-quarters combat, making the training largely a precaution rather than a practical necessity. Similarly, preparations for chemical warfare demonstrated the gap between anticipated threats and actual wartime developments. Military planners dedicated considerable resources to training and equipment meant for deploying gas attacks, yet such assaults never materialized. The fear of poison gases remained largely theoretical, and this meant that vast quantities of gas masks and protective gear went largely unused, representing an unnecessary logistical burden. The story was much the same with shotgun training. Marines were prepared to deploy shotguns against enemies in specific combat scenarios, notably urban warfare or close-quarters fighting, but these situations rarely unfolded as predicted. The logistical hurdles associated with supplying shotgun ammunition added an extra layer of complexity to their use. Each 12-gauge shell, a standard caliber for shotguns, weighed approximately twice as much as a typical rifle cartridge and occupied roughly 3 times the space. This meant that a Marine could carry about 80 rounds of rifle ammunition in the same space and weight as 36 shotgun shells, making shotguns a less efficient choice for sustained combat operations. Logistics and supply chain priorities further minimize the deployment of shotguns on the battlefield. Supply ships, tasked with resupplying frontline troops, deliberately prioritize the transportation of essential items such as rifle ammunition, machine gun belts, and mortar shells over specialized shotgun cartridges. The constrained cargo capacity of landing craft and transport vessels meant that every ammunition case had to be carefully justified, and traditionally, general-purpose ammunition took precedence over those designated for less versatile weapons. As a result, even when shotguns were issued to Marine units, the amount of ammunition available was typically limited, often consisting of just 1 or 2 boxes meant to last through full operations. Veterans who participated in these campaigns vividly recall the scarcity of shotgun shells, often receiving only a few boxes that needed to serve entire campaigns. This scarcity naturally discouraged much liberal use of the weapon, constraining its potential impact. Theoretically, shotguns were expected to excel in urban combat scenarios, fights taking place within close quarters of buildings, alleyways, and confined spaces, leading military planners to request higher allocation rates for shotguns in anticipation of the intense fighting expected in battles like those at Manila and in the port city of Naha. Indeed, these urban environments appeared perfectly suited for shotgun employment. Short engagement distances, room-clearing missions, and the necessity of rapid, decisive destruction of enemy defenders. However, the realities encountered during actual urban combat revealed unforeseen limitations. Japanese defenders, often occupying well-fortified positions, created kill zones and obstacles that prevented Marines from closing in to effective shotgun range. Barricaded positions, intertwined fields of fire from machine guns, interconnected rooms and booby traps all contributed to a formidable perimeter that kept American forces at a distance well beyond the shotgun's best effective range. The impressive firepower that theoretically made shotguns well-suited for urban fighting proved largely irrelevant under these conditions. Marines found themselves unable to close into close range, and in situations where close-quarters combat did occur, veterans generally reported relying on different weapons, namely grenades, Thompson submachine guns, and flamethrowers, whose effectiveness and versatility at close range exceeded that of the shotgun. The Thompson submachine gun, with its magazine capacity of 30 rounds, provided sustained firepower that far outstripped the 6-shot capacity of typical shotguns, enabling Marines to respond to threats more effectively during prolonged encounters. While shotguns did not significantly influence Japanese military tactics or strategic thinking, they acquired a disproportionate place in American military mythology and popular culture. The image of a Marine wielding a trench gun, courageously clearing Japanese positions, became an iconic symbol of American resilience and ingenuity, even though this portrayal bore limited factual basis in the weapon's actual battlefield success. The cultural resonance of the shotgun surpassed its tangible combat impact, elevating it to a symbol of American practicality and resourcefulness. The shotgun's iconic status also reflected a broader narrative, one emphasizing American ingenuity in repurposing hunting weapons for military use, diverging from traditional European military conventions that favored more formalized firearm designs and techniques. This approach resonated deeply with a perception of Americans as inventive and pragmatic, unconstrained by established military orthodoxy, seeking to adapt whatever tools were available to meet wartime demands. This mythologized image served a propagandistic purpose, reinforcing a story of resourcefulness and grit that bolstered morale and national pride. However, when the reality of combat was examined more closely, it became clear that the actual contribution of shotguns was relatively limited. The perceived significance of the weapon in combat was magnified by cultural storytelling and media. Japanese military culture, during the early to mid-20th century, was deeply rooted in a traditional emphasis on specific weaponry, particularly rifles, machine guns, and artillery. These arms were regarded as the cornerstone of effective military force, forming the backbone of their combat doctrine. Interestingly, this prevalent mindset led to the near-complete omission of shotguns from their conceptualization of warfare. The notion that their military preparedness was lacking because of such an oversight is a common assumption. However, historical evidence suggests a different narrative. In reality, the limited adoption and employment of shotguns during conflicts was primarily due to practical factors. Most notably, the weapon's actual deployment in combat was minimal, not because of any deep-seated cultural gaps or ideological neglect. The story of shotguns in military settings exemplifies the intricate and often complex relationship between technological innovation and adaptive doctrine. While these weapons were capable of devastating effects at close quarters, especially due to their spreading patterns, their effectiveness was highly dependent on specific tactical conditions. These conditions, such as dense jungle terrain, were ideal for shotguns, allowing their destructive potential to be maximized. Yet, in the unpredictable and fluid environment of actual combat, such ideal conditions rarely materialize consistently, limiting their practical utility. Throughout the Pacific War, the evolution of Marine Corps tactics reflected a gradual development of doctrine. Despite this, shotguns never achieved a firm place within the formal tactical system. Instead, they remained supplementary tools employed selectively for particular situations rather than as fundamental components of squad-level firepower. This peripheral role was not a consequence of technological shortcomings, but rather a reflection of real-world combat experience. The practical challenges faced in combat show that shotguns, while potentially advantageous in specific scenarios, did not integrate seamlessly into the broader tactical framework. The success stories of particular weapons often hinge on their full integration into military doctrine. For instance, the trench mortar, BAR, quickly became a focal point within Marine Squad tactics, with detailed doctrines evolving around its use that enhanced the effectiveness of small units. Similarly, the flamethrower revolutionized the clearing of fortified positions like bunkers, prompting significant tactical innovations. These cases demonstrate how technological advancements can drive doctrinal evolution by providing new capabilities, yet shotguns did not trigger comparable doctrinal shifts. Their potential remained largely theoretical, and practical considerations prevented their widespread adoption. A different perspective on shotgun employment can be gleaned from examining military administrative records, requisitions, repair logs, and replacement requests, which serve as tangible evidence of actual weapon usage. Items related to rifles and machine guns continually appeared in supply and maintenance logs, emphasizing their heavy and ongoing use in combat operations. Conversely, shotgun parts and requisitions were relatively infrequent, reliably indicating limited actual employment in combat situations. The repair reports from Marine divisions highlighted a similar pattern. Rifles and machine guns were subjected to constant maintenance and repair, a clear indicator of high operational tempo. Shotguns, on the other hand, were primarily kept clean from storage corrosion rather than from extensive firing, underscoring their infrequent use. The administrative data reinforces the view that most shotguns spent a majority of their time in arms rooms or storage facilities rather than actively participating in combat. Ammunition requisition records further support this conclusion. While divisions requested millions of rounds for their rifles and hundreds of thousands for their machine guns, requests for shotgun shells were relatively modest and often aimed at training purposes rather than actual combat needs. This pattern of procurement and maintenance reinforces the understanding that shotguns played a limited role in the Pacific theater. Contextual comparisons with other nations' experiences support this interpretation. British and Australian forces operating in the Pacific theater seldom employed shotguns, relying more heavily on rifles and submachine guns for jungle combat. Their combat effectiveness, despite the absence of shotguns, strongly suggests that these weapons were not crucial to winning jungle warfare in the Pacific. Similarly, Soviet forces across a diverse range of terrains, including the urban battlegrounds of Stalingrad and the rural expanses of Kursk, did not adopt shotguns into their standard small arms arsenal, despite their prodigious production of various small arms during the war. In the same vein, Chinese forces engaged in fierce close-quarters combat throughout their prolonged conflict with Japan, yet they also did not incorporate shotguns into their standard operational tools. The widespread use and reliance on other small arms, along with tactical doctrines adapted to their specific battlefield situations, marginalized the role of shotguns entirely. This collective experience across multiple Allied and Axis forces underscores a broader regional and strategic consensus. Shotguns, regardless of their technological potential, were generally considered auxiliary tools rather than essential weapons for successful combat in the varied terrains and conditions encountered during the war. Despite their apparent appeal and the widespread availability of shotguns during the World War II era, their actual role on the battlefield was notably limited. This was true even with the urgent and desperate need for reliable and effective weaponry during that tumultuous period. Analyzing the broader international military perspective at the time reveals that shotguns were regarded more as one option within a wider arsenal, rather than as a weapon of paramount importance in combat operations. Different nations, each with their unique strategies and logistical constraints, achieved comparable tactical outcomes through various combinations of firearms, which suggests that the influence of shotguns on overall battlefield effectiveness remained marginal, regardless of the considerable American production capacities dedicated to manufacturing these weapons. In the aftermath of the war, military analysts undertook comprehensive evaluations of the weapon systems used during World War II, with an eye toward anticipating future conflicts. The U.S. Army's Infantry Board, responsible for assessing and selecting weapons for continued development, conducted meticulous studies that prioritized the refinement of rifles, machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles. These were regarded as the most vital tools for infantry combat, reflecting a consensus on their tactical significance and battlefield utility. By contrast, shotguns attracted little interest in the post-war period, a clear indication that their performance during the war did not justify extensive investment or further development. During the Korean War, despite the intense close-quarters combat that typified many engagements, shotguns saw only limited use. Marine units and other troops deployed during this conflict generally relied on weapons like the M1 Garand rifle, BAR, Browning automatic rifle, and carbines for patrol and combat operations rather than shotguns. This choice by seasoned combat veterans, many of whom had served in the Pacific Theater, speaks volumes about their practical assessments of shotguns' true utility in combat scenarios they had experienced firsthand. When the Vietnam War erupted, there was a noticeable shift toward reintroducing shotguns into military inventories, often in the form of custom-modified commercial models tailored for jungle warfare. These weapons were typically employed during patrols in dense jungle environments where close-range fighting was frequent. Nevertheless, even in the chaotic and confined skirmishes characteristic of Vietnam, shotguns primarily remained specialized tools reserved for point men, tunnel rats, and other specialized roles, rather than being adopted as standard issue for all infantry. This historical pattern of limited shotgun employment persists in modern military practices, where these weapons continue to serve specific, niche functions rather than core combat roles. Considering the historical record provides several clear insights about the interactions between Japanese forces and American shotguns during the Second World War. First, while shotguns were present in Marine units across the Pacific Campaign, their actual application in combat was minimal, constrained by problems such as ammunition shortages, tactical limitations, and doctrinal priorities. When brass ammunition was introduced in March of 1645, it was too late to substantially alter combat outcomes or strategic effectiveness related to shotguns. Second, Japanese forces never developed specialized countermeasures aimed specifically at shotguns. Their limited tactical impact meant that they did not merit particular attention in military planning, training materials, or post-war assessments. The absence of dedicated combat doctrine or operational references concerning shotguns in Japanese military documents underscores their marginal role in influencing or determining the course of battles. Instead, Japanese tactical evolution was driven largely by a response to American firepower as a whole, rather than focused on neutralizing a weapon whose influence was comparatively minor. Third, a notable discrepancy exists between the number of shotguns officially authorized for deployment and their actual documented use in combat situations. For instance, each Marine division was authorized to carry over 350 shotguns, yet most of these weapons remain in secondary capacities, used for guard duties, training routines, or security behind the front lines, rather than engaging directly in combat. Veteran accounts, when they do mention shotguns, tend to describe their utility as situational and limited, acknowledging that they were helpful in specific scenarios, but not as primary weapons for frontline fighting. Finally, the popular image and mythology surrounding the role of shotguns in the Pacific theater far exceed what the historical record supports. Popular culture has elevated shotguns to a symbol of ruggedness and close-range combat prowess, often portraying them as iconic and decisive tools of victory. However, detailed primary sources and wartime analyses show that their actual impact on the overall outcome of military campaigns was limited. This romanticized view sometimes clouds an accurate understanding of their true battlefield significance, which was largely marginal and confined to niche roles rather than being a decisive factor in the conflict's resolution. In the grand scheme of military history, it is often the case that the outcome of battles hinges on the strategic deployment of a diverse array of weapons, ranging from the thunderous power of artillery and naval gunfire to the swift precision of aircraft and the destructive force of flamethrowers. These tools, wielded with expertise and integrated into larger tactical frameworks, define the shifting tides of warfare. While rifles, machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers consistently played pivotal roles in determining the direction and resolution of conflicts, the story of shotguns in combat, though sometimes overshadowed, offers valuable lessons about the nature of military innovation, the importance of proper integration, and the often underestimated complexities that influence battlefield effectiveness. While shotguns, equipped with their unique design and perceived advantages, seemed to hold the potential for specialized use, the reality was that technical capabilities alone were insufficient to ensure a significant tactical impact. The mere presence of a weapon does not guarantee its effectiveness unless it fits within the broader scope of military doctrine, logistics, training protocols, and operational strategies. In the case of shotguns, although they possess certain theoretical benefits, like their formidable power at close quarters, they faced numerous practical limitations that ultimately restricted their deployment and influence on the battlefield. The Japanese military, for example, failed to anticipate the potential utility of shotguns in combat. However, this oversight proved to be largely inconsequential, because shotguns never gained the battlefield prominence needed to exploit such a lapse in judgment. Their marginal role was not due to a significant gap in strategic foresight, but rather because shotguns simply did not attain the tactical relevance necessary to alter the flow of combat. The weapons that did influence the outcome of the Pacific War, such as artillery pieces, naval artillery, aircraft, and flamethrowers, received focused attention and resources from Japanese military planners. These tools delivered the destructive force and tactical versatility that shaped the course of campaigns. The industrial capacity demonstrated by the United States to produce vast quantities of military shotguns epitomized manufacturing prowess. But producing large numbers of weapons does not automatically translate into battlefield success. The critical challenge lies in the ability to employ these weapons effectively within the conditions of Pacific warfare. This disconnect between manufacturing capability and practical application highlights a key lesson. Military strength is not solely a product of industrial might, but also hinges on proper tactics, training, and adaptation to environment and operational demands. The encounter between Japanese infantry and American shotguns during World War II ultimately reveals more about military myths and perceptions than about stark combat realities. While shotguns were indeed present in various units and occasionally proved useful in specific scenarios, such as clearing entrenched positions or close quarters engagements, they never achieved the widespread devastating impact often attributed to them in popular narratives. In fact, the Japanese forces were generally unprepared for the presence of shotguns wielded by American troops. However, this lack of preparedness was largely irrelevant in the grand scheme because shotguns played a minor role in shaping the overall battle outcomes. A thorough examination of historical records, including production figures, training manuals, and organizational tables, confirms that shotguns were part of Marine units and that they had a recognized place within the military structure. Nevertheless, the scarcity of detailed combat accounts, statistical data, and documented Japanese countermeasures indicates that their actual use in combat remained limited and peripheral. Veterans who carried shotguns tend to recall their role as specialized tools suited for particular tasks, rather than as primary weapons capable of changing the course of battles. The adoption of brass ammunition in March of the year 1945 marked a significant technical advancement, effectively addressing the critical moisture-related issues that impeded shotgun effectiveness. Yet by the time this improvement was realized, the strategic landscape of the Pacific was already largely determined. The island-hopping campaigns, which relied heavily on combined arms tactics, overwhelming firepower, and naval dominance, had effectively decided the war. In these decisive operations, close-quarters shotgun combat played a negligible role, overshadowed by larger, more impactful military technologies. The Japanese military's lack of specific countermeasures against shotguns further underscores their accurate tactical assessment. They correctly identified that American artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers, not shotguns, were the weapons dictating battle outcomes. Despite the theoretical advantages of shotguns at close range, they simply did not achieve the level of tactical significance necessary to warrant a dedicated strategic focus or countermeasures. Instead, the broader emphasis remained on neutralizing the weapon systems that presented an actual threat to larger operational objectives. In essence, the story of shotguns in the Pacific Theater highlights the importance of understanding the difference between potential and actual battlefield influence. While they were present and occasionally effective, their role was minor when viewed against the comprehensive scope of war efforts. Their limited employment and impact serve as a reminder that in warfare, technology alone is insufficient. Success depends equally on tactical integration, strategic foresight, and the ability to adapt to the realities of combat environments. The myth of their devastating impact persists largely because of popular perceptions, but the historical record demonstrates throughout history, modern military forces have continued to utilize shotguns for a variety of specialized functions, each tailored to particular tactical needs. These weapons have found roles in situations such as breaching fortified doors, deploying less lethal ammunition for crowd control or non-lethal engagements, and handling close-quarters combat scenarios where precision and power are paramount. Despite their continued presence in contemporary arsenals, the tactical significance of shotguns remains confined to narrow, context-specific applications. This sparse use in the modern battlefield bears a closer resemblance to their actual employment during the Second World War than to the exaggerated portrayals often promoted by popular mythology. Rather than serving as primary assault weapons or pivotal battlefield tools, shotguns during that era fulfilled limited yet crucial roles. They proved effective only within specific controlled circumstances rather than as decisive instruments that could turn the tide of battles. This transformation from what was historically accurate into widespread legend exemplifies how war stories tend to evolve beyond their factual basis, often embellishing small facts into larger-than-life narratives. The powerful emotive images of Marines charging through Japanese defenses with shotguns in hand contribute to a compelling narrative that appeals to cultural storytelling rather than factual accuracy. This romanticized version of history caters to a desire to depict American soldiers as resourceful and adaptable, showcasing technological ingenuity and tactical innovation. Such stories, while captivating, tend to distort or oversimplify the complex reality of warfare, which can be far more mundane and less dramatic. To truly understand the role of shotguns in the Pacific Theater, it is necessary to differentiate between verified historical accounts and the mythologized tales that have accumulated over time. Historically, shotguns did exist within the arsenal of the United States military during World War II and were authorized for use in specific situations. They occasionally proved effective, especially in close-range encounters, but they did not achieve the widespread tactical impact that popular legends suggest. Their presence was real, but they never became the decisive weapon against Japanese infantry that legends often imply. While Japanese soldiers were likely taken by surprise to encounter such weapons in assault situations, this unexpected element did little to alter the ultimate course of battle, which was predominantly influenced by American superior firepower, logistical support, and the comprehensive application of combined arms tactics. A careful review of verified history reveals a less sensational but more accurate picture. Shotguns served primarily as specialized tools suited for particular defensive or offensive tasks. Their use was hampered by issues such as ammunition shortages, problems that persisted until late into the war, and were largely relegated to secondary roles. they never gained the tactical prominence that would make them stand out as game changers in the larger scope of Pacific operations. Instead, they played a supporting part, supplementing the main efforts driven by larger forces, technology, and strategic coordination. This factual reality may lack the gripping appeal that mythologized stories evoke, but it reflects a more precise understanding rooted in primary sources, veteran testimonies, and detailed military records. A closer look at the evidence suggests that the story of Japanese forces encountering American shotguns reveals more about the nature of war storytelling than about any actual battlefield impact. While the weapons themselves hold symbolic significance, standing as emblems of American ingenuity and pragmatic adaptation, these symbols do not correspond to a substantial influence on combat outcomes. The cultural importance ascribed to shotguns often exceeds their tangible battlefield effectiveness, transforming them into symbols of American resourcefulness and firepower. Despite their limited documented success in combat, the mythologized narrative elevates their status, contributing to a romanticized perception of the Pacific War experience. This disconnect between the myth and the historical reality underscores a broader trend in popular military history: the tendency to prioritize dramatic, emotionally compelling stories over the often less exciting truths of mundane military operations. Though Japanese troops may have been genuinely surprised to see American soldiers wielding 12-gauge shotguns during assaults, their fear of these weapons' potential was greatly exaggerated. In reality, the weapon's impact on the course of fighting in the Pacific was insignificant compared to the overwhelming power of American industrial capacity, superior logistical support, coordinated combined arms tactics, and relentless naval superiority. These factors proved decisive in overcoming Japanese defenses far more effectively than the sporadic, isolated use of buckshot in dense jungle combat. In truth, the story of shotguns in the Pacific theater illustrates not a narrative of tactical innovation through unexpected weaponry, but instead highlights the complex relationship between reality and myth. It demonstrates how certain elements of warfare, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, can become magnified into symbols that serve wider cultural and national narratives. The actual battlefield achievements derived from technological, logistical, and strategic superiority far overshadow the supposed impact of shotguns, which ultimately served as secondary tools rather than battlefield game changers. In sum, understanding the real role of shotguns in World War II emphasizes that their presence was limited, their tactical influence modest, and their mythologized role far more prominent in popular imagination. The true story reveals that the decisive factors in Pacific warfare were larger, more comprehensive elements, such as industrial strength, supply chains, and well-coordinated forces. During the vast and tumultuous conflicts that unfolded across the Pacific theater of World War II, military capability, strategies of combat deployment, and the shaping of historical narratives played pivotal roles in defining the course and legacy of the war. The intricate interplay of these elements reveals much about how nations prepared for, conducted, and remembered this critical chapter of global history. At the core of the Pacific War was a relentless pursuit of military strength, where the United States, Japan, and their respective allies dedicated enormous resources to developing formidable armed forces. This included not only the procurement of cutting-edge technology and extensive troop training, but also the strategic deployment of forces across numerous island chains and vast oceanic expanses. From aircraft carriers indispensable for naval dominance to the deployment of specialized Marines and ground troops, each nation sought to maximize its military potential to outmaneuver opponents in a complex and multifaceted theater. The nature of combat in the Pacific was characterized by amphibious assaults, guerrilla warfare in occupied territories, and decisive naval battles that often took place amidst challenging logistical conditions. The unique geography of the Pacific, with its scattered islands and vast reaches of open water, dictated the tactics and operational planning of all parties involved. Military commanders had to master a delicate balance, projecting power across great distances while maintaining supply lines and adapting to unpredictable environments. This necessitated innovative approaches to combat employment, including the use of island-hopping campaigns aimed at strategic conquest and resource acquisition, as well as the employment of advanced aircraft and naval technology to dominate both air and sea forays. As the war progressed, these military capabilities were frequently tested in major battles, such as Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippines, each contributing to a deeper understanding of effective combat strategies specific to the Pacific. These engagements did not merely serve as military confrontations, they also became symbols of national resilience and technological ingenuity. Each victory or defeat was meticulously analyzed and fed into a larger narrative that helped shape public perception and morale. Beyond the battlefield, the stories and myths constructed around the Pacific War significantly influenced how this conflict was remembered and understood in subsequent years. The characterization of certain battles as pivotal moments, such as the Battle of Midway as the turning point, became enshrined in the collective memory, often imbued with a sense of heroism and sacrifice. These historical mythologies often exaggerated the heroics of individuals or valorized specific strategies, creating legendary portrayals of courage that transcended mere military analysis. Moreover, the emphasis placed on particular narratives sometimes overshadowed the more nuanced realities of wartime decision-making, alliances, and the complex interplay of political motives. Over time, these stories serve both to honor those who fought and to craft national identities rooted in resilience and victory. The mythologization of certain events also helped to justify subsequent military and geopolitical policies, deeply embedding the Pacific War's legacy within national consciousness and international history. In essence, the Pacific War was shaped not only by the tangible aspects of military capability and combat tactics, but also by the powerful stories we tell about those struggles. Both elements, technological and strategic developments in the cultural memory, interacted to produce a vivid, enduring narrative of sacrifice, ingenuity, and perseverance that continues to influence global perceptions of the conflict even many decades later.